Welcome to the Learn to Eat Mindfully webinar. Now that everyone, or mostly everyone who wants to, knows how to use the chat, you can certainly take a look there and ask me questions throughout the webinar. I'm happy to stop and answer. I can also do a big Q&A at the end, whatever you guys want. But if you don't know who we are, first of all, my name is Brittany. I'm a registered dietitian at On Point Nutrition. And so we are a virtual counseling company. We're a team of qualified dietitians and nutritionists, and we provide counseling to help people meet their health goals, whatever that might be. We always work at your pace, just to help you get that healthier lifestyle that everyone's looking for. So in tonight's webinar, we'll be talking about how to eat mindfully. And not only is this a huge buzzword, or mindfulness is a huge buzzword in the health community, the health and wellness community, a lot of our clients are asking us, like, how do we eat mindfully? Like, what does that even mean? So tonight I'm going to give you guys, whether you're a client or not, some insight into what eating mindfully actually is and how to start to do it tonight. So now we know the title, Learn to Eat Mindfully, and my name is Brittany. We're going to get started. Let's see if this works. Look at that. Okay, so first things first, we have to know what is mindfulness, right? So again, like I said, it's a big buzzword in the wellness community, but what does it actually mean? So mindfulness comes from a Zen Buddhism type of way of living. And the definition is paying attention in a particular way on purpose in the present moment, non-judgmentally. So that's a really long explanation for something that we just thought meant paying attention and watching what you ate. So it's a lot more than just how you react to your environment, but it's really being in the present moment, and that non-judgmental piece, which is probably the hardest piece, plays a huge role in mindfulness. And so mindful eating is then using that awareness to dictate how you eat and how you relate to food. So it's really not about what you're eating at all. It's about how you eat. So now that we have some of the basics down, and again, feel free if you have questions or comments in the chat. You know, this can be a free-flowing conversation, but we'll keep going. So now we're going to get into what is mindful eating. We know that mindfulness is awareness, it's being non-judgmental and living in the present moment. Mindful eating is applying those principles to your eating. So a couple things here, right? So what is eating mindfully? It's using mindfulness to reach a state of full attention to your experience of eating. And so I know probably my moms and dads out there might not have been able to experience this in quite a while, paying full attention to your meals. It means eating slower without distraction, which I'm sure almost everybody here has eaten a meal today already with their phone in their hands. So we're going to try to get away from that as much as we can. To distinguish between biological hunger and emotional triggers for eating. So if you're kind of in on this mindful eating, intuitive eating world, you know that there's a lot of biological cues that we get and sometimes ignore. And then there's also a lot of emotional triggers that keep us, reaching for those same chips every night. And, it's really good to be able to at least name and distinguish between the two, and it gives you all the more power. So the other thing that we don't always do with our Easy Mac or ramen noodles is to engage our senses, to notice the color, the smells, the sounds, the textures, and the flavors of food. And all of these things we're going to be getting into later on in the webinar tonight. But eating to feel your best by noticing the effects that food has on your physical body. Typically the day after, right? Like the day after we eat something that tasted good at the time, but we know it's not going to sit with us well. Mindful eating is thinking ahead of time and being present enough and aware enough of your hunger and fullness cues to be able to make a decision that might be different than ones you have made in the past. And then appreciating and savoring your food. That's a really big part of mindful eating as well. And a lot of times it can feel that like if you completely savor and love and appreciate your food, people at the table with you might think that you're weird or that, there's something gluttonous about it. But truly, the more you appreciate and savor your food, you're going to live a happier life, first of all. You're going to eat things that you like rather than things that you're forced to eat. And you're going to eat slower, which will lead to all the health goals that a lot of us ultimately have, whether it's better digestion, a healthier weight, feeling better about the food choices that you make. All of these things come with mindful eating. And that's why I'm glad you guys came to watch this webinar tonight. So there's a lot of positive things that will come out of mindful eating. And it's not just emotional or physical, it's a holistic approach. Questions so far? We're quiet in the chat, but that's okay. Okay, so I'm going to move on. The 4 S's of mindful eating. I like to think that I made this up. I didn't look it up online. I made it myself, and maybe it exists. But I'm going to take you guys through 4 steps. And I wanted to say 4 easy steps, but they're not always easy when you're first getting started. But nonetheless, 4 steps that will help you to eat more mindfully and be able to benefit from a mindful life. So the first step, dun, da, da, da. Step 1, sit down. This might be the place where some people get tripped up, no pun intended. But the environment that you eat in is really the first thing that will affect how mindfully you can eat at first. So again, parents, anyone with not just 2 people or 1 person in their household, this might be like your hardest step, just the first step. So at a crowded party, restaurant, this is like the next level. But if we're talking about in your own kitchen, at your own kitchen table, if you could just sit down, that is the first step toward eating mindfully. And I can go through all the reasons why, but I think we're all kind of seeing how it makes sense, right? The distance that your food is from your mouth, the comfortable position, it's relaxed, you're not feeling rushed, you're not by the pantry, you're not eating while you're cooking, you're sitting down, and it is a focused activity. So can you think of a space in your home where you can do this? Sometimes it's actually not your kitchen. Sometimes it's like during nap time on the couch with a plate, with some sort of a table-esque thing in front of you. So type in the chat where you feel like you'd be able to sit down in your home and practice mindful eating, even if it's just with a snack. And this is where I wish I had my music, because I'll wait. And I know they take a little while to come in. Office, yes. Kitchen island, sitting at the kitchen island, I'm assuming. Love it. So a really great way to start your mindful eating journey, yes, kitchen counter, kitchen island, office, is to visualize yourself in that place, eating mindfully. Like visualize your ultimate goal, and then you'll be able to at least start. And when you see yourself in that environment, it will be a huge help in getting started, because you're actually going to go there and you're going to sit down, and then the rest will unfold. And so, like I said, especially in crazy households, it may not be like dinner that is like your most mindful meal to start. It may be lunch. It may be that you're in your office and you turn off your computer and you set a timer and you're just like, I'm just going to eat and I'm just going to focus for 10 minutes. And that's how you get started. But having a spot to sit down is the first step. So step 2, that's not so bad, right? Sit down. Step 2 gets a little bit more complicated. Slow down. Most of the clients that I work with, this is where we pay a lot of attention to, I should say. It's really, really easy to eat quickly. And a lot of us are trained to eat quickly, right? We're moving really fast. It's maybe how we grew up. And a lot of times when we do that, we're ignoring our body's hunger and fullness signals just because it's ingrained. It's what we're used to. But slowing down is really one of the best ways that we can get your mind and body to communicate in the way that we really need. And I don't know if this is a fun fact for anybody, But when I learned this, it really made so much sense. It takes just about 20 minutes for your brain to recognize that your stomach is full. 20 minutes is a really long time. It's an episode of your favorite TV show, unless it's on like one of those fancy channels, but normal TV shows, 20 minutes. There's a lag between the timing of how much we can eat in 20 minutes and when we actually notice how full we are. That's why sometimes we find ourselves in that like limbo state where you're eating and you're not really like noticing anything, and then all of a sudden it hits you. And hopefully this doesn't happen too often, but since eating really quick and sometimes finishing our entire plate is just an ingrained habit, not that it's your fault, it's just like how you were raised or how we are as humans, it's really easy to overeat, especially when we're eating really quickly. So by slowing down, we give our body a chance to catch up with our brain. So we give our stomach, I should say, a chance to catch up with our brain. And in today's modern society, like sitting and just doing one activity for 20 minutes is really, really hard. And I'm speaking for myself too. It's tough. And so even cutting that down to 10 minutes and seeing how you feel after 10 minutes, you will notice a huge difference. So some things that you might do to help you slow down would be putting the fork down in between bites. I'll say my husband's been trying to do that, and I notice his hand going for the fork, even if he's still chewing, but it's just this muscle memory that we just always do. So trying to use your non-dominant hand to eat, maybe not at a restaurant, but this can also help to kind of slow you down. Some other things that'll help to slow down the pace at which you eat are steps 2 and 3. So before I get to step 2 and 3, has anyone tried any other methods to kind of slow down their eating and, try to practice eating mindfully? What have you guys done in the past or present? Put down the fork, walk away, come back. That works. Chew slower. Yeah, I didn't even put that. That would be something that would make the most sense here. So focusing on chewing slower, and in my next couple of slides, I'm gonna show you some ideas of savoring your food. Oops, I gave away one of the S's. And in doing that, you have to chew slower. Great. So a couple of things you can try. But yeah, the first thing we do is we sit down. We're not eating at the kitchen counter. We're not running around and grabbing bites of food. We're sitting down and eating. And the second thing is we're slowing down. And someone just gave another example, drinking some water in between bites, putting the fork down, getting up and walking away. If you kind of felt like, okay, I just need to like cool it for a second, that's okay. It's a practice. Closing your eyes. Love that. I actually do tell clients to close their eyes when they're eating certain foods. And I'm going to come back to the closing your eyes technique in my next slide. So steps 3 and 4. So let's first go to step 3. We've sat down, we've started to slow down. What's the next logical thing to do? We're going to sense. So sometimes this can be really surprising for a lot of clients that I work with. And even myself, when you slow down, you taste, you smell, you look at, you even listen to or feel the foods that you're eating, sometimes it's not even what you expected. Sometimes the foods that you held up on such a high pedestal aren't even that good. And sometimes they're really good. For example, you go to a wedding and in normal times, right? You go to a wedding and you get a slice of wedding cake and you've been looking forward all night to the wedding cake. It looks so good. It was so pretty. And you eat it and it's like stale and it's not that good. And that's eating mindfully. That's saying, okay, well, I've tasted this and it's actually not going to nourish me. It's not going to do the things that I thought it would do for me. So I'm not going to continue eating this. Another thing that you can start to sense is temperature. Is it hot? Is it cold? You can always do spicy, sour, like any of these labels help you to just be in the present moment. And as you'll notice, none of these we're not there yet, but none of these things are Do I like this? Is this good for me? Is this healthy? Because this is a non-judgmental experience. This is just labeling things at face value. And so sometimes you can ask yourself, am I responding to an emotional want or my body's physical need? A lot of times we tend to eat or are unsure if we're eating based on biological hunger or emotional hunger. And both of those are very valid reasons to eat. They just might show up a little bit differently for everybody. So what other questions might you ask yourself when you're trying to sense what you're like sensing during your meal, when you're trying to sense your food and if you like it, or if you're at a restaurant or a home cooked meal or whatever, what kinds of questions can you ask yourself? And I should mention too that I'm the only one who sees these. So if you want to ask me a question or have a comment that you don't want me to read out loud or just allude to, I can also do that because I only see these comments coming in. So getting back to the question is, what do you ask yourself while you're trying to sense your food? I think a lot of people might say, is this hot or cold? That's our first question. It's not always like, is this going to make me feel good tomorrow? Do I even like this? So what other things might you ask yourself? I know there's a delay on the questions here. So yeah, am I only going to have this one day a year? Is this something that I am fully savoring right now? Am I enjoying this? And not just am I enjoying this food, like what is my environment like? You're allowed to ask yourself these questions and put yourself in a better position to maybe like take the food home and enjoy it mindfully at home. Let's say if you're at a restaurant and there's like screaming kids everywhere and you're just like, I'm not enjoying this. Let me take it home and I can like fully savor what I'm eating. See how I did that? That's step 4. So let's go to step 4. So after we've sat down, we slow down, we're sensing our food, we're labeling certain things. If it's hot, it's cold, do we like it? Am I comfortable? Asking yourself a couple of questions. The last thing is to savor your food. And this is where you can really start to use that hunger and fullness scale. So I give a graphic to clients when we're working together, but typically it's on a scale of 1 to 10. 1 being I'm starving, I haven't eaten for weeks. 10 being I just had Thanksgiving dinner. Where are you on that hunger scale? A lot of times we think that hunger and fullness is an on and off switch, right? I'm hungry, I'm full. But it's actually a sliding dimmer, let's just say, if we're using the light analogy. There's lots of different types of hunger, different types of fullness that we can be. And the more we tap into, and again, just label our feelings and what we're sensing, you will give yourself so much power by doing that. So someone asked, how do you learn to realize what just being satisfied feels like and how to stop afterwards? That's a really good question. So the best way to do that is to practice. It's not going to happen overnight, but by thinking of your hunger and fullness as a scale from 1 to 10, I would start to label where you're at before, during, and after every meal if you can. Then you can start to see, okay, like, I'm at an 8. I know what eating past an 8 will feel like. Do I want to feel like that? But the more you experience it and actually practice it, the more comfortable you'll feel with the shifts in that like slightly full, satisfied to that stuffed feeling. But it's a practice. I hope that's helpful. I can also go into more detail as well. But again, we're so, I want to say, like ingrained to just eat past fullness and eat everything that's there and not always taste and not always slow down, that to retrain our brains and to revamp our neural pathways completely differently, you know, it takes a little bit of time, it takes a little bit of work. But tools like this that can just help you at very face value, like not even getting into the depth, not even getting into the emotion that typically stands behind some or a lot of our eating habits, this can help you be well on your way to feeling more comfortable in eating more mindfully. So yeah, using that hunger scale could be really, really helpful. And if you search hunger scale on Google, you can certainly find a great picture. And if not, you can send me an email and I will send you the picture that I like to send to clients. So definitely, as we're looking at mindful eating, someone had asked if I recommend like using pen or paper, notating feelings, or any food apps. So it depends what the goal is, right? So if we're feeling like we just want to slow down and focus on the actual how of what we eat, not always the why, then using a metric of just numbers can be really helpful. It takes some of the emotions out of it. But then when we want to look deeper, writing down how you're feeling before, during, and after a meal can be really helpful. I wouldn't recommend doing it for every single meal because that can get pretty overwhelming. But I would say if there's like a red flag time of the day, it's typically like dinner, after dinner for a lot of people, that's when I would start to write down your emotions. And also pair it with the actual biological hunger scale numbers. So, you know, I'm feeling like lonely, but I'm actually at like a 5, like I'm actually feeling pretty good. With that knowledge, you can say, okay, like what can I do to satisfy loneliness? It's not always food. Once you've had that like actual label on what's going on, you can then say, okay, let me like call someone, let me have a hot cup of tea, let me like get a cozy blanket or something, and or just sit with the discomfort rather than trying to reach for food. I hope that's helpful too. But like I say in my slide here, with practice, you'll learn your body's personal hunger signals. And so as we look at how we eat and why we eat and all the things behind it, mindful eating focuses primarily on the way in which you eat. So by practicing mindful eating, you're able to have the how you eat separate from the emotions that come with it. And then you're better able to focus on the emotions, and then the eating seems a lot less tied to the emotion, if that makes sense. I wish I could see your faces, but I cannot. So I hope it makes sense. And the one thing to remember too is that this is a judgment-free activity. I know a lot of mindful eating goes against the things that we're kind of taught automatically, which is you have to eat quickly, you can't savor your food or else you're weird, you can't slow down because we have places to be, you have to finish your plate, you have to judge yourself on what you're eating, and it's morally, you know, based. But mindful eating is actually the opposite of all of that. And so the biggest thing too, as you're going through these practices and feeling frustrated because it's really, really hard to do at first, and even if you like get used to it, sometimes it's just still hard in general. The judgment-free piece is huge. So making sure that you're being kind to yourself as you continue to want the best for yourself. It's easier said than done, but it's a huge piece because all mindfulness is just labeling things without judgment. And it actually makes you a more focused and balanced person. And mindful eating is doing that as it relates to food. So I'm going to take a sip of water. So I'm going to go off to the side. Questions while I'm drinking and having a sip of water. All right. So let's talk a little bit about mindless eating. So what mindful eating is not. And some of these are a little bit obvious, but I do like this graphic. So obviously mindless eating would be eating past fullness and ignoring your body's hunger signals. This is really huge. When we start to tune in to our body's hunger and fullness signals and not ignoring them, we are able to eat more mindfully, because we've automatically, before we've even decided what to eat, we've gotten in touch with what's going on in our bodies. And yes, it's a practice, but the more you listen to and don't judge your body's signals, you'll start to see some changes. So I think a lot of times when we eat towards, or we eat past fullness, or we eat till we're stuffed, it's probably because we've ignored some other cue early on in the day. Let's say it's 3 o'clock and we say, oh, I'm not supposed to be hungry yet, so I'm not going to eat. You know, when 5 or 6 o'clock rolls around, the odds that you're going to overeat are pretty high. So that's why mindful eating always says to listen to your body and stop when you're full. So eat when you're hungry and stop when you're full. It's like the gold standard. I can't say everyone does it all the time, but even to just try is to succeed in mindful eating. So mindless eating would be eating when emotions tell us to eat, obviously, right? We're sad, we're bored. This is what I talk to a lot of clients about. And we think that on paper, the answer is very obvious, like what to do and what not to do. But as someone in the chat had said, writing down your feelings, looking a little bit deeper, and labeling the mindful 4 S's in combination will make a huge difference as far as emotional or stress eating, or even habitual eating, just because we're used to eating after dinner every night. So mindful eating would be eating when our bodies tell us to eat, like our stomach's growling, our energy is low, even if it's 3 o'clock, having something. So mindless eating would be eating alone or eating at random times. Not that you can't eat alone when you're eating mindfully, but eating because you're alone is a whole different story. So mindful eating would be eating with others, sometimes at set times and places. And I got a question. I'm going to finish this slide and then I'm going to answer the question. So mindless eating would be eating foods that are emotionally comforting. Though I can't say I 100% agree with number 4. I'll get into that in a second. But mindful eating would be eating foods that are nutritionally healthy. So in my opinion, mindful eating can be eating foods that comfort you and are healthy. So we're going to nix number 4. Mindless eating would be eating while multitasking. Mindful eating would be eating when you're just sitting, even for 20 minutes, even for 10 minutes, even for 5 minutes. Just to start the practice is what it's all about. So mindless eating, and we're going to get into this, the next slide, would be considering a meal an end product. So thinking of, a processed food that you might eat, it's not a big deal, like a cracker or whatever. As a cracker, mindful eating would be considering, okay, like what's in this cracker? We have whole grain flour, we have salt, we have some olive oil. So these are ways that we can eat more mindfully, except for number 4, but I like the rest of them. So let me head over to the questions. How do you manage eating when having to cook for someone else who's hungry and you're not hungry all the time? So yeah, that can be a delicate balance. Of course, meal prepping can always be helpful so that there's always something for that person who's hungry to eat. Can you tell me a little bit more about like what it looks like in your household? Like, do you guys make sure to eat together, or is it just a matter of having foods available? And I think you can only chat here. That's all I know how to do. So you can type more detail. But yeah, a lot of this is not fully around a family or a partner who wants to eat at a different time, or a partner who wants to eat something different. Okay, so would meal prepping, I should probably say what's happening in the chat. Someone's asking how you manage eating when having to cook for someone else who's hungry and you're not hungry all the time. And they do like to eat together. And so it's important for this person to cook for who she's taking care of. So if meal prepping would be something that you're open to, that could be helpful so that this person can eat when they're hungry, you can eat when you're hungry. And it doesn't have to be like crazy intense meals. It could be prepping a whole thing of pasta, a whole thing of chicken or beans or rice, and then having some vegetables. Doing that once a week, I think, is going to save you a lot of time and energy, so that you'll always have something for this person, you'll always have something for yourself, even if the meal timing doesn't work out. So that would be my advice there. And, this is definitely, like I said, a practice, especially when working around other people's schedules. But even if you can take 2 minutes, I keep going down from 20, but even 2 minutes to slow down, sit down, sense and savor, you're going to feel the benefits, even if it's just for a couple of bites. And I hope that that was helpful. I can go into more detail. So if I don't have more questions, I'm going to head to the next slide. All right. And of course, you guys can continue to ask questions. All right, so eating as a form of self-care. I know a lot of times, and another buzzword here, self-care is face masks or getting your nails done, but really self-care can happen throughout the day, every day, in the form of food. So tell me, what is eating as a form of self-care? What does that mean for you? As you guys are thinking, I can tell you what it means for me. It means listening to my hunger and fullness. It means eating when I'm hungry, stopping when I'm full, thinking about what foods may or may not affect my GI system in a certain way, and avoiding those foods, even though they're really good. So what does eating as a form of self-care mean to you? I really wish I kept my music going. I think someone just leaned on their keyboard. I was like, not sure if this was a code I was supposed to know. But as everyone's typing, I'm going to review the slide a little bit too. So understanding your underlying motivations for wanting to eat your best and do the best you can for yourself every day is really like why we eat, right? And why we do other things, but this webinar is about eating. So eating as a form of self-care is really just to feel your best every day. Like that is the ultimate goal. That is the ultimate motivator. So someone says eating as a form of self-care means letting myself eat something that I wouldn't have allowed myself years ago, because now I know it's okay to eat a little ice cream just because I enjoy it. Now I eat 4 spoonfuls rather than the whole pint. That is amazing. And yeah, that's eating as a form of self-care, choosing foods that fuel my body and not what I want because of that instant gratification. So a lot of times I talk to clients, and I love all these comments. A lot of times I talk to clients about pleasure versus happiness. And sometimes something that's pleasurable is not actually going to make us happy. And that's like a really complex topic that I could do a whole nother webinar on. But, having a few spoonfuls of ice cream gives you both, right? It gives you pleasure. It also gives you happiness when you wake up the next morning feeling okay and not having GI issues. And looking at food as a form of fuel is something that I also want to talk about. So these are great. These are great. I love seeing this. So eating foods that are emotionally comforting and foods that are nutritionally healthy, that is a part of eating as a form of self-care. So like you guys had already said in the chat here, it's okay that some foods feel a little bit like medicine when we eat them. Not that they taste like medicine, but we kind of feel like, all right, let me get a veggie in. It's going to nourish me. My body needs it. And then we also have foods that are satisfying and comforting, like ice cream. And it also has some calcium in there because of the dairy. So like that nourishes your body too. But it doesn't have to be all or nothing. And it can depend on the day. It can depend on how you're feeling. It could depend on what's available in your house. But foods don't just have to be fuel or pleasure. There's a mix of everything, and it's all about the how you eat it, the mindfulness factor, if you didn't catch my drift, that's what matters. And so that's how I feel about that bullet point. So another way you can eat as a form of self-care is to connect more deeply to your food. So I truthfully never did this until I listened to some podcast about like coffee. So I love coffee, and this woman on the podcast was like, why don't you think about like where the coffee comes from and like what it took to like get the coffee to your house. The food industry in general has all kinds of ins and outs of it, but ultimately, it comes from a farm. There's a person who has picked it and they've washed it and whatever they do. But it doesn't just show up at your house. There's so much that comes that it takes to grow the food and to process the food and do everything. So I'm doing a bad job of explaining this, but not thinking of your food as just an end product can also help you to be more mindful about it. So not just saying, is this hot, is this cold, but like, where does this come from? Like, let me think about like the flour or the sugar or whatever that has gone into this. And again, without judgment, not thinking about it too deeply other than to label it. That can be really helpful when we're trying to be more mindful about our meals. And so another way to eat as a form of self-care is, of course, considering how the foods you choose will nourish you and fuel you. And so as we tie all of this together, we're thinking about how we can feel our best every day, how the food will, of course, nourish and fuel you biologically, but also potentially emotionally, potentially just to satisfy you, and what that really means. So this slide isn't 100% all about mindful eating. It's also about self-care. Obviously, it says it right on the top. But choosing the foods that nourish and fuel you and eating them mindfully will help you to feel your best every day. So putting it all together, that's what I have to say about that. Everyone's really quiet in the chat. What are we thinking about this slide so far? So we're almost to the end of the presentation, and I'd like to take some questions. I know everyone's probably just typing their questions right now, and it takes a little bit to come through. So before I finish up, I want to review the 4 S's, and then any questions that come in, I will answer them. And yes, eating as a form of self-care. I love this philosophy as well. Someone wrote in the chat that they like it. And it really does help when we're looking at our decision-making around food and like, what will this do for me? How will this make me feel? All these questions. So someone also wrote, although connecting with my food sounds weird, I think will help me slow down and think about what I'm eating. Exactly. And so taking that non-judgment piece out of it and just labeling things. Is it hot? Is it cold? Where did it come from? No emotions in there. That's a really great place to start. So having a good source of healthy recipes helps when looking for those like evening snacks and desserts. Yeah. A lot of what I talk to my clients about is like, if you're going to eat after dinner, like, let's plan for it. Let's make something healthy. Let's not say, okay, nothing after 6 p.m. and then you go to bed at 10 and that's 4 hours without eating. And sometimes you need something. So yes, it is really great to have some healthy recipes that you feel comforted by and also nourish you. And that could be very, very possible. And we have those at On Point. I don't know who is a client here and who is a new member of the community, but we do have lots of healthy dessert recipes, whether it's on our Instagram. If you're a client or a new client, we check them out on our member portal. So a little review of the 4 S's. So the first one, we're going to sit down. We're going to sit down in our office. We're going to sit down at the island in the kitchen. We're going to sit down somewhere. And as best as we can, we're going to try to avoid distractions. So if it's the kids and the phone, put the phone away. The kids are going to stay, but try to at least limit the distractions. Step 2, we're going to slow down by chewing more slowly, putting the fork down, trying to eat with your non-dominant hand if you don't have a shirt on that you like, but recognizing that it takes 20 minutes for the brain to recognize that the stomach is full. It's a long time. We can eat a lot in 20 minutes. So knowing that information, this will give you a more informed experience when you're eating your next meal. So steps 3 and 4, we're going to sense our food. So whether that's taste, smell, looking at what color it is, without judgment, just labeling it. And that is a big part of mindfulness. Then you can ask yourself some questions by sensing your hunger and fullness, by seeing if you're actually hungry using that hunger scale. And then 4th, you can, of course, savor your food without judgment, knowing that it's okay to connect with your food, knowing that it's okay to like or dislike something that you thought would always be on the menu. All of this is okay. So I'm happy to answer questions, but what I want to remind everybody is that it only works if you practice it. And this doesn't happen overnight, but writing things down, labeling all your senses, starting to savor your food, slowing down, sitting down, all of that stuff will help you to become a mindful eater. And it really just starts with 1 meal per day. If everyone can choose 1 meal, whether it's dinner tonight, breakfast tomorrow, and for a week, just eat mindfully, intentionally during that 1 meal, that would just be a great start. And so questions, I'm happy to take them. I think some people are writing comments in the chat. Being a client at On Point has taught me to look at recipes and find alternative ones that can be healthier and fulfill that emotional need. And not only just having snacks and desserts, but meals too. Yes, exactly. And I promise this is a real person, not just a person who we put in here to say nice things. Actually, I recognize this name, and this client has worked really, really hard and is putting all of these pieces together. So here are my resources. If you're interested, most of this was from my my experience in my brain, but I did look up a couple of things. And yes, we can send the PowerPoint in the follow-up email with the recording, which you guys will all be receiving tomorrow. So I will make sure that the PowerPoint is included. But like I said, if anyone has further questions, I'm going to stay on for a little bit longer. You can always send me an email. My email is right on the page here if you have other questions. Follow us on Instagram at onpoint.nutrition. And I'm really glad you enjoyed the session. I feel really passionately about this, so I was really, really glad to be doing this for you guys. But I'll stick around for a little bit if anyone has questions. And again, send me an email, anything you need. Thank you. Bye, everybody. Yes, thank you, thank you.